Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first author spotlight in the Author Spotlight series. Let me begin with wishing all of you happy International Women's Day, which is tomorrow in advance, and happy Women's History Month. In honor of Women History Month, we wanted to highlight women's stories and women authors who use their voice to make change and on topics we don't usually talk about. For those of you who are new to us, Raksha is a Georgia based nonprofit with a mission that works towards healing, empowerment, and justice to South Asian survivors of violence. And coming back to our author spotlight, today it is an honor to introduce our first author of the series. Her name is Nandita Godbole. Nandita, welcome. A little bit about Nandita. She is a multidimensional powerhouse. And I say that because she is a food writer, she's a blogger, she's a cookbook author, and she's also a speaker, wellness consultant, businesswoman, and entrepreneur. Through her business venture and website, Curry Cravings, she shares her writings and recipes, offers curated special events and catering services. Turmeric Press, which is the publishing division of Curry Cravings, she offers full range design, editing, digital marketing, and printing services. Nandita's specialty is creating niche cookbooks that go beyond recipes, and they are infused with cultural observations and family traditions. And they're guided by her knowledge of botany and Ayurveda. So do check it out. Her website is www.currycravings.com. So welcome, Nandita, again. Thank you for joining us today. Let's begin with reading an excerpt from your book, which I'm really looking forward to. Let's see what you picked.
Uh, Thank you for hosting. I appreciate that I was invited and that I can do this today. This is amazing. This is an excerpt from my book, 10,000 Tongues. And this was a biofiction that I wrote in 2018. And this was a hard book to write because there were about 8 stories of different women that I wanted to cover. So pardon my old lady glasses, but I have to uh, make sure I don't miss any words. And this is towards later in the book, and talking about a character by the name of Anna, and she is starting her journey to write and trying to figure out her feet in there. So Anna was not raised to refer to cookbooks, but to listen to those who cooked with passion and care. Mummy, Dadaji, Gaju, Maniba, and even Papa when he used to cook. Cookbooks could tell readers where to find ingredients, how much to cook and measure, but not how to engage with the ingredients or capture the warmth of their preparation. Recipes could elaborate on how many servings a recipe would make, but not who could truly enjoy the dish. They could tell someone how to serve it, but not how to organize the gathering. Recipes could perhaps share how a dish was beneficial, but would never be able to measure the comfort found, or the energy, or the shared pleasures of those who enjoyed the meal. Most cookbooks and cooking shows presented tangible pieces, they were impersonal. Even the cooking shows lacked the magnetic, captivating, mesmerizing energy and passion Anna craved, the long lasting allure and hunger of comforting foods. What Anna sought was a thorough, spiritual familiarity. That made all the difference. A casual conversation with one of her Secret Supper diner guests raised the question, why did she not publish her recipes and share it with others? She would write a book as a gift for Ananda. But the more she wrote, she paused and reflected. What was good about her book? Was it a book of recipes if it could not convey emotion or love? As she mulled the idea, Anna remembered the northern lights from nearly a dozen years ago. Perhaps Ananta had come into her life as her own blessing, the path that the great Mahitoba had set for her to lead her out of darkness, giving her the will and the energy to move towards the bright morning. Perhaps exploring her true desire to collect the recipes would help. But no publisher wanted personal stories about comfort food. They all wanted the naans and the butter chicken recipes, the raita and the lassi, the halwa and the biryani recipes. They wanted the exotic, the opulent, the glamorous, the stereotypical Bollywood theatrics. They had wanted the next superstar, the known personality, the one who would fill a room under 5 seconds and sell thousands of copies in an instant. They did not want a book from someone who did not have a culinary background. Besides, foreigners with funny accents were a hard sell, and she did not use curry powder. Oh, there was something strange about Anna. What they did not understand, they did not want to touch. They most definitely did not want the ordinary, the everyday meals, the very foods that made each meal exceptional and memorable in Anna's home. I'll take a pause here, and I think this introduces Anna's transformation as a cookbook author.
That's lovely. Your book was very interesting, by the way. I loved how you started with so many characters in the past, and it all you can actually see the journey of the main character and why it is so, based on the stories of her ancestors or family members. But let's come to your newest book. Let's start from there, from the present. Um, and the name of your book is cookbook is Seven Pots of Tea.
Mhm.
Um, can you tell us more about it, in the sense, why seven pots, and then why tea?
Why tea and why seven pots? Good questions. First of all, there are a couple of things that led me to this title. At first, I thought, we're really looking for a book. I was looking to find a book on Indian teas and Indian Ayurvedic teas and brews and whatnot, and I couldn't find anything. And again, that's part of where my brain just dives into, let's write a book because there is nothing else out there like this. And I realized that Ayurveda talks about the six rasas, and so we have all these different rasas, and there's the seventh, which is, if you look at other cultures, food cultures, they have the umami, which is this whole thing of all the rasas or the flavors or the intrinsic qualities of food coming together to offer the umami. And we're all looking for that perfect blend,
Mm,
and we're looking for that umami.
mm,
But in our Indian tradition or the Hindu tradition or the Ayurvedic tradition, there isn't a word for that. It's the balance. We talk about it as balance. We don't
mhm.
talk about it as one, two, three. We talk about it as santulan or balance. And it kept that words kept coming to me in terms of how we're seeking that balance.
Right.
And then at the same time, I also came across this old poem from many thousands of years ago, written by a Chinese philosopher, and his poem was Seven Cups of Tea. And he talked about how tea became part. At first, it just makes your mouth feel less parched and less dry, and then it starts going into your body. And towards the end, the last cup, his seventh cup, is where he becomes one with his creator. And
I
he
see.
had this very beautiful way of portraying the seven steps that
Mhm.
it takes to go from being just your one person to achieving something that's so fully well balanced, it's your nirvana of sorts. So that's where those two ideas kind of blended. And I have a thing with numbers, it seems like, because I just realized my 10,000 tugs and then we
Yeah.
have seven pots of tea. So I have a thing with numbers.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. So you have delved into a lot of research for this book, right? I mean, it, go, like you mentioned, Seven Cups of Tea. It's just not that. You've gone into the history. You've gone behind why tea was really popular after the British rule. Can you tell us a little more about that research, in the sense that you don't really cover just tea in your book. You talk about the history, and I found some interesting things that I probably never thought about. That tea was not really part of a beverage of ancient India. So can you just elaborate on that, please?
Of course, chai, I would say, is not so much as part of ancient India as tea actually was. Not as ancient, but about in the 15th something century. But I'll backtrack and kind of give you an overview. When I talked to people about the idea of writing a book on tea, I talked to a bunch of people. There was a graphic designer I talked to and a photographer, and I said, okay, what should a book cover look like? And I realized that every person's idea of tea related to the Chinese or the Japanese idea of tea, where you
Mm.
have this tea kettle and you have a particular style and a particular vision of
Yeah.
what tea looks like.
Mhm.
And Indian tea is not like that in any shape or form. There is this big kettle, and you, or maybe, you have a little cup like this, or, a cutting chai or whatever. And the more I got into it, the more I realized that people did not really understand what Indian beverages are like,
Mm.
period. We either talk about chai,
Mm.
or like other people, we talk about a lot of things, but other people just think about Indian beverages as being either masala chai
Mhm.
or the dreaded chai tea latte,
Mhm.
or the whole lassi aspect of it. So other than these two, there is nothing in between. There are no in between ways. So
Mhm.
when I was writing, I decided to look into more of the history of where did tea really come from for India,
Mhm.
and that led me on the path of finding out, yes, India actually did have tea. It just wasn't commercially available. There were tribes in the northeast that were drinking tea long before tea even became a commercial product,
Mhm.
and they were drinking it as this energizing beverage made with fermented leaves. They would take the leaves and collect them, bind them up, and ferment them and smoke them, and that
Mhm.
was their tea. And over time, after the British came, and they were actually in India because they were trying to find cheaper tea. They were trying to get tea from China, and
Mhm.
Chinese tea was very, um, very expensive for them. So they figured they would find another place to colonize, and maybe that was their source for tea.
Mhm.
And that's how tea came to be more commercialized in India. I wouldn't say tea came to India. I would
Mhm.
never say that. Tea was already there in India.
Mhm.
And it became commercialized. And in time, what people were writing about these experiences with tea. There was a lady who was from Britain who married a Muslim man, and she lived, I think, in Lucknow.
Mhm.
And there's not much detail about her life, except she wrote about her daily life as a British woman living in a Muslim household. So she actually wrote down all the details of how they lived.
Mhm.
And in that, she said, yeah, they don't drink tea. They don't drink any form of tea. And if I want to find tea, or if they want to find tea, the tea is available in the chemist shop. It's
Mm.
not part of our ritual. And
Mhm.
that led me to question, when did we actually start drinking chai? This
Mhm.
thing that we love so much.
Mhm.
And people actually hated chai. There were commercials all over the place when the Tea Board of India started putting out their tea, and they wanted to profit from every possible ounce of tea that they produced. The
Mhm.
Indian tea, Indians, they made to them available what is dust, and
Mm.
dust tea is bitter,
Mhm.
which basically, already Indians are like, what is this bitter thing? This is this is
Mhm.
medicine. I don't want it.
Yeah.
And then you're forcing them to drink it. And so they started this jugaad business of trying to doctor it up and trying to figure out how to make the taste more palatable to them. So, there you go. So that's how tea became popular or chai rather became popular. And in time, it's one beverage we cannot live without, except now, if you think about it, it's not more than 100 and some years old
Mhm.
in India in the form that we enjoy it.
Yeah.
So,
That's right. Well, that brings me to an interesting thing you've said before in the past about the gender dimensions
mhm.
associated with tea and how we, as South Asians or Indians, or broadly South Asians, actually need to rethink chai, and
Yes.
that is one of the recurring taglines in your, work. So I would love to know more about that.
Yes, I get teased about trying to get people to rethink chai because they're like, "What are you talking about? We're all never. This is our chai,"
Mm-hmm.
and we're so passionate about this drink because it's part of our day. But when I did the research and I was looking at how difficult it was for even for Indians, let's not talk about gender in the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, People were abducted from their villages to go work on plantations.
Mm-hmm.
People were not paid enough. There were indentured workers.
Mm-hmm.
who made the British Empire have all these exports of tea. And that became the way tea got introduced in terms of a commercial product in India.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, when they had trouble selling tea, there were a lot of advertisements that were being put out that actually perpetuated the idea that the woman should be, carrying this tea, and, she should be the one making it because she's taking care of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this whole separation of who gets to make the tea and who's responsible for the family's well-being. And we saw a lot of there was a whole exhibit done in Delhi where they had actually taken these tea advertisements, and it was very interesting to see how tea was presented and sold
Mm-hmm.
to Indians
Mm-hmm.
uh, up front and early on, and during the even during the Freedom March, the Freedom Movement. My grandfather, my dad's dad, he was a freedom fighter, and I found his book and I was reading it, and he was part of the Satyagraha movement, and I was shocked. I was like, how?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was supporting British coffers. So the whole Gandhian movement was, let's try to go non-cooperation. We're not buying your tea. And that meant that they were drinking a brew, and they went back to drinking a brew made out of herbs and spices and whatnot, and used that as their morning wake up ritual. And
Mm-hmm.
they did that for a good chunk of time. So I
Mm-hmm.
found these references where tea became this little knob that, depending on what the situation was, it kind of showed the meter of the pulse of the nation, and it was used as a ploy, or used as a tool in shifting how people thought. And the
Mm-hmm.
very same tea that was rejected during the freedom movement by the satyagrahis,
Mm-hmm.
after after it achieved its independence, because we were so broke, to put it plainly, there was a huge push to support what is made in India and the Swadeshi movement.
Mm-hmm.
And then you saw the commercials of drink Swadeshi, and you'll see this woman, holding a cup. It's not the man holding the cup, it's the woman holding the cup saying, drink Swadeshi tea. And
Right.
so you see tea being part of um, this whole conversation in India.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting and that's why when I think about how we take our tea so passionately,
Mm-hmm.
but don't really know of the details of it, I don't
Mm-hmm.
want you to change your tea drinking habits. I just want you to rethink where your cup comes from.
Mm-hmm. So for those who don't understand Hindi, Swadeshi would mean indigenous or homegrown. Have I explained that well, Nandita?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. That's
Okay.
that's like made in India. So
Okay.
of course.
Right. So I think after reading this book, I don't think people can have a sip of their chai without thinking about the history of it, right? I think is that what you were aiming at when you wrote the book?
I did, and the challenges I have is when Indians or people from South Asian origin, or we're so tied to the idea of our morning cup, and you and I have talked in a different, well, over a different conversation before,
Mm-hmm.
that we don't think about what constitutes the idea of tea, and
Right.
why we should take pride in it also, and at the
Mm-hmm.
same time also understand that India is actually one of the world's biggest producers of tea,
Mm-hmm.
and all we stick with is a really low grade kind of tea. And
Mm-hmm.
in fact, very recently, there was an article in one of the newspapers where it was almost mocking that this guy was selling this 1,000 rupee cup of
Mm-hmm.
tea. And would it be your cup of tea? And I read it and I was like, yeah, I would pay, because he's talking about all the different tea estates that the tea is sourced from. He's finding you the best kinds of tea that other companies and other conglomerates are literally just taking packaging and putting their own profit margin on it, and we never see it. We're the ones growing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I encourage people to rethink their idea of what constitutes tea. And it's
Right.
not just, what comes in a tea bag. Um, Please don't use tea bags, that's bad for the environment. But, we need to think about where we stand in the consumption, and how our habits can impact the
Mm-hmm.
livelihood of other people. if we start asking for better tea.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, the trickle down effect is that the plantations that provide these teas are able to offer better conditions to the people who are growing it, who are plucking it, who are providing that source. And so you share the profits
Mm-hmm.
and not and actually start expecting that. So that's hoping that with the tea book, we're not just talking about Ayurveda, but we're also kind of I'm hoping people actually begin to look at this in this fashion.
Mm. Okay, very interesting. And speaking of the other dimensions to recipes, you talk about food from various intersecting themes. At least the 2-3 cookbooks that I've seen, and that as a writer could be confusing. So how do you start with wanting to write a cookbook with a purpose? And can you give a couple of examples? For example, in 10,000 Tongues, what was the inspiration? Did you start with the cookbook first, or did you start with the novel first?
It's funny you ask this because they're so intertwined. And not the story, the truth of the matter was that my dad was not well, and he was we didn't know that at the time. He was in the last few days before he passed,
Mm-hmm.
and he had Parkinson's, and we were trying to help him jog his memory. And he had a very interesting relationship with his parents, um, and we were trying to get him to cheer up. And we said, "Oh, Papa, what do you eat? What did you eat when you were a kid?" And all that kind of stuff. And we started getting him to talk,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized he had so many stories to tell about food, around people, and the only thing we could recreate for him from his childhood was some of the food. And I recall we made sandan for him, which his mother was born into the Jewish faith, and she used to prepare it for special holidays. And he said, I used to eat that and I used to enjoy it, but I haven't eaten sandan in many, many, many years. And we took it upon ourselves at that time. We were like, okay, well, Papa wants sandan, so we're going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
And we made it, and he was like, oh, this is just like I remember. And he was so cheered up in that moment. I will never forget it. And when he passed, that was a way for us to recreate the moments that him and my mom shared.
Mm-hmm.
Him, he shared with us, or memories around his life. And the more I delved into it, the more I realized there were more stories to tell, and not just his. And the book actually started by with a title, with a working title of Finding Grandma, because I wanted to understand my paternal grandmother, my dadi,
Mm-hmm.
and I discovered so much more than that. There were so many more stories, and they were all leading up to this grand space where I am not just a product of me. I'm a product of all the people who came before me, who the choices they made, the little pivots they took, the little leaps of faith they took, the way they cooked, and all of that is connected to who I am right now. So it's more like your genetic makeup, but from a more personal perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something for everyone. You have one of those. If we are in any way, shape, or form have family around us that we know and care for, we know that we are a product of them and whatever they brought to today, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why we exist. So honoring that was just as important, so I could move ahead. Because I was getting asked a lot, like, "Hey, you cook this dish that is from this part of the country, and you also cook that dish that's from the other part of the country, and how is that connected to here?" And it was untangling all those pieces, and at the same time also being able to share them. So
Mm-hmm.
that was the vehicle for me, and that helped me write 10,000 Tongues, and it became a big fat book. So uh, it was a lot of research and a lot of storytelling involved from the different perspectives from the 1800s and until now. So
Right. So the cookbook came first. No, the cookbook came later. Is
the
that
the cook the cookbook for actually 10,000 Tongues has a parallel cookbook, so they're all together. They're not separate.
okay? So you wrote them parallelly. I was just curious to know that because it is definitely the book is derived from. I mean, the roots go really long back, and then it's not just about food. Well, you have mentioned food a lot in the book, And I just found that interesting that, the book and the accompanying cookbook make a good pair, because you then get the context of where it comes from.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, that helps people understand that we have roots. Like there's a dish that we make a lot during Diwali, and it goes back to my great great grandmother. And every time we tell her story when I make the dish, and it's like I need to write it down because I may be the only person who actually remembers hearing it
mhm,
from a person who had met her.
mhm,
So just even for my family, I think that that helps. But it we are all tied through food.
right. Um, Now, the book doesn't just touch upon the food that's passed between generations. There's trauma, there is wisdom, um, and there are traditions which kind of form the belief of the generations who come after.
Mhm.
Uh, can we talk a little more about that in the context of Women's History Month? Because as women, as South Asian women, I think we subconsciously mold ourselves or our roles or our decisions based on what we have seen our mothers or heard about our grandmothers, or things like that. So can you please, share your perspective on this, in the sense, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing?
It's both good and bad, to put it plainly, but it's mostly good.
Mm,
I think what I learned even while writing 10,000 Tongues or in the many years that I've lived away from family is that we share certain connections with how we make decisions with our parents, our peers, our family elders, as we would want to call them, and we take their guidance into consideration and say, all right, well, you guide me for this, but our situation may be different from what theirs was when they made that decision or their reasoning for guiding you. So as we go, we build one layer over another. And it's okay to walk away from some things that don't work. And
mm,
I think that's the balance that we each have to seek in terms of preserving what is at core, but also allowing ourselves the ability to adapt. And I think when I was writing 10,000 Tongues, I realized that each of the women that I covered actually shifted their perspective when they became parents.
mm,
And they began to think about not just themselves, but also their own parents
mhm,
and what they were leaving as a legacy for their offspring, whether it was a boy or girl, it didn't matter. But they did make those conscious choices. And I think that's a legacy that we all have and carry. If you are a parent, you know that. If you have that ability where you're either a peer or in a place of being a mentor,
mhm,
you give the other person the freedom to make those choices and build them with confidence. And I
mhm,
think that's where we have to find the balance between um, the old ways and the new ways. And
mhm,
sometimes the old ways are like, this is how I've done it for generations, this is how you're going to do it. If there is that the logic that goes with it doesn't apply now,
mm,
then I think that's you have to give them that generation a room to grow and say, okay, I will take this into consideration, but I need to change.
right.
And that's something that the South Asian diaspora really struggles
Mhm,
with keeping a certain set of ties and then creating your own space. And I think we need that confidence from our elders to grow, rather than the weight of you're not doing this the same way as I did. And
mm,
I think we struggle with that. So in in the middle age section, the sandwich generation that I'm in, is you have these two levels that you have to address, and there's the set of peers or elders, and then there's a set that comes after you. And if you don't have the confidence, then you can't pass any down
mhm,
in many ways. So we have to hold our own. So everybody has to kind of make space for each other, and I think that's part of growing up.
mm,
Any age, um, and we need to keep doing that. We need to keep pushing for that in whatever incremental ways we can.
right.
And I think that's where all. all our stories are essential. They're
Right.
not different, or inappropriate or anything. They're all there. They all need to be told, and that's what makes us today. That's what makes now happen.
Mhm.
Without yesterday, now wouldn't be possible.
Right. Speaking of transitions from yesterday to tomorrow, to today to tomorrow, I'd like to actually see what your thoughts are on South Asian literature as largely. I mean, let's look at the number of women writers who've come, recently. And there's a lot of female influence on writing, South Asian writing recently. What are some challenges and learnings that you have faced as a writer of South Asian origin and roots? And you're also an indie author and a self-published.
Mhm.
Given all these dimensions, and the fact that there is a lot of active, I think I'm missing the word here, but there's a lot of activity in the
Mhm.
landscape. Right?
Yeah.
So what are some learnings and challenges you'd like to share with other authors?
I think all authors have their own journey in terms of finding their identity of who they are as an author. I would have never in a million years thought I would have been, a cookbook author, let alone have, half a dozen books already, or I would never have thought that. So I think that the the fact remains that the part of it which I read earlier was this whole idea of what we think um, as being the confines of expectations. And when you say, all right, well, there is no such thing as whatever, and women are often more likely to choose to not challenge themselves
Mm,
because they feel afraid or they don't feel confident or they don't have a structure around them that's confident and boosting them up and
mm,
saying, no, you can do this, we are here to help you. And I
mm,
think that's something that every author, in however much their success is, they always have that, whether it's their first book or their 10th book or their 100th book, and they need that from around them. And just out of um, out of my experience, I find that our authors are always looking for support, and they're looking for the cheer from your own, whether it is not your own family right now, as a um, you know as an immigrant, or being away from your family. I count all the entire South Asian uh, diaspora around me as my extended family, and we're all authors who look for support to your family to say, hey, you're doing a good job, or how can I help you. And those things really count, those things matter. And I would encourage the South Asian community to support their own authors just as much as they do others, and not saying that they don't already, but there's more needed. And you're right that there are so many authors, and the good part is that we are seeing more voices come in.
mm,
The bad part is that we see a lot of stuff that publishers don't even bring to the US, and there are so many books that it takes months and years before they're available on Amazon US, or you can order them. Or I've been known to actually ask family who is, around a bookstore in India and say, can you please buy this book and put it in the mail for me so I get it sooner? And that's kind of, in this day and age, we should not have to do that. So
mm.
I would hope that we actually ask publishers to do better, um, and actually bring more voices out. And that's part of why I'm an indie. Is I didn't find the support in publishers. They looked at me and laughed, and they were like, "Oh, you crazy woman, you're not going to write a book." And the funny part was they hadn't really met me, and I said, okay, I'm going to try. And I had a few friends, and we all just kind of were like, okay, we're going to crowdfund this. And the book was funded. That was the funniest thing, was the book was funded in 72 hours. I have never in my life seen that happen, where just out with no book in place, no manuscript in place, nothing. I found support because was different enough of a voice for people to appreciate.
Right.
And That's just because I put myself out there. And I would encourage other people to do that just because we need to see more of that.
Mm-hmm.
And and I admire other people who do it. So I know a lot of indie authors, I know a lot of traditional published authors, and it is a very, very brave thing to do to put your name on something and say, I own this. I
Mm-hmm.
own the content and I am proud of it. So I think that that's something for us to look forward to for the South Asian community to just kind of cheer on its own and just embrace each other.
Right.
That would be a beautiful history to write about.
Right. On the note of camaraderie, do you have any message for female authors or women in general on in Women's History Month?
Just do it. Just do it. Don't let other people tell you what your limitations are. And I have to remind myself that often when I hear a little nagging voice that says, "Oh, you're limited by this and you can't do it because." I think women have the capacity and the strength in them to say, I can do this. And we have it in us. We have bad days, but those bad days don't define us. We have days when we're stressed. Those days do not define us. We are stronger than other people think we are. And we just have to go out there and do it and prove them wrong. And there is no better joy than doing that. And, just be supportive. And, we have a great community. We're
Mm-hmm.
all really, really, we all have gifts to share. So
Mm-hmm.
share.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that message. I'm just checking if we have any questions. I think one of the questions that came through was something about flavors and aromas of tea. Would you like to elaborate on what it does in terms of wellness, like for your soul or health?
Oh wow. I think one of the things that I learned, apart from Ayurveda, the Ayurvedic aspect of it is different, is actually stopping to appreciate every aspect of your flavors that you're enjoying. So your Ayurveda has the six rasas, and the sweet, sour, astringent, bitter, pungent, and salty.
Mm-hmm.
All those are what make whatever we eat either enjoyable or not. It's the different the tongue map. You can do the tongue map and see that those are flavors.
Mm-hmm.
But all it does require us to actually be in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And even if we are able to give ourselves, our soul, that 5 second, 10 second, 1 minute of joy, of recognizing that we are doing something for ourselves, then
Mm-hmm.
it makes for a much more enjoyable cup of whatever tea you're drinking, whether it's a tisane or whether it is a tea or whether it is a chai,
Mm-hmm.
anything. So I think that that's an essential part of recognizing how rasas will impact you, whether or not you're dealing with Ayurveda. Now, Ayurveda itself has its own thing about, this helps this rasa and this helps your dosha. And so there's stuff in it or rather stuff about it in the book, and I would encourage you to read that if or find it if you are interested in understanding how your rasa and your dosha and your body can kind of work together and benefit.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of the point of putting the idea of rasas out there was to actually encourage people to stop, slow down, and try and get those flavors, which is we've been running for all our lives. And Gauri, you and I talked about this earlier in a different conversation that we don't stop. We
Mm-hmm.
don't stop to take in that moment. We don't stop to enjoy now. We don't stop to enjoy what's in front of us, and we're already thinking about 3 days out from now. And hopefully, just making your own tea
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing the components of it is going to give you more calm, and that is just beginning of the wellness journey.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever your journey is, you want to do, have a better night's sleep or whatever that is. And I'm just throwing words out there for that regard. But whatever your journey is, it will get you started, and
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we need to do. We just don't. We and it's as simple as making a cup of tea. It takes literally less than 5 minutes.
It is meditative.
It
Yeah.
is
So,
incredibly.
one more question. Does Seven Pots of Tea include stories?
I did not have room for the stories in Seven Cups of Tea, and the sad part is the only stories I got to include was
Mm-hmm.
the story of tea and story of chai in India,
Mm-hmm.
and that will there's about 100 some pages of old history that is just buried in old documents and in old travelogues and in whatnot papers that we don't take the time to read. And
Mm.
I think that that was my point. Of that was the story I wanted to include, and that was the story of tea and chai in India. It's
Right.
not like British brought tea to India. No, they brought themselves to India. We had our tea,
And,
and we need to own that.
and it all blended.
We all blended. We did a good job.
At that. This actually has been a great session, and your books are a great read. I think I learned a lot about tea with your recent book, and like I said, I would not be able to look at a cup of tea the same way before as before. So good luck to your future, projects and endeavors, and I'm sure you're very busy with all of them. And we really enjoyed having you on our first author spotlight.
Thank
Thank
you again so much for hosting, and I look forward to working with you guys more.
Likewise.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.